My journey is I was married and my ex-husband was in the Air Force, Department of Defence, and he got a posting overseas for 6 months and I couldn't go. And when he came back, I had a 12-week-old and an 8-year-old, and while he was over there he had an affair, and this was sort of quite noticeable when he returned, and I found myself, he ended up leaving and he took the phone and the car so I wouldn't talk to anyone or go anywhere, and it put me in a position that I had to look at finding a roof over my head for my 8-year-old and my 12-week-old, and that took me to Department of Housing reluctantly. And so that's how it all started. It was really hard because I wasn't working, I wasn't earning an income, and I had no idea that this was going to happen. My ex-husband and I ended up reconciling for a while. He had a posting to Richmond, so in that posting we were moved because I was still living in defence housing while I was sort of waiting to get divorced and all, or see how our marriage was going, whether we'd reconcile or not. So that was a process. So by the time that all happened, my youngest one was 18 months when I came to Richmond. In the first week that I was in Richmond, my ex-husband had an alcoholic seizure, and that ended our marriage. Emotionally, I was not in a good place. So I then was in the defence housing for at least 6 months after that separation. I then went to Department of Housing to do a transfer from Newcastle to here, and I ended up getting private rental first, which basically took up most of any money I was getting from Centrelink, and that took about 12 months, which found me in North Richmond. And that was a shock to my system because the street was not safe. I felt insecure, but I had to do the best I could. I was there 9 years, and when my eldest son passed away, it was not safe for my youngest son to I couldn't even let him out the back. It took me a while to get a transfer from there, and then the department offered me a brand new place in a street that was even worse than the street I was leaving. And I said no to that. Then they offered me the place that I'm in now. And that was 18 years ago. And I wasn't happy, but I knew that I'd have to wait much longer because then I'd be put on the bottom of the list. They only gave me 4 days to move, which I thought was really hard and unfair, because usually there is a protocol and they give you a bit more notice than 4 days. But I dealt with that issue once I moved into this place, and because 6.5 months after I moved in, that's how long it took me, I wrote a letter, and it was a 4.5-page letter. So I had to then, I suppose, accept the fact that I was in this street. It's a roof over my head. So it's all good. I try not to make a mess of it or disrespect it because it's my roof. It's hard for people in public housing or community housing at times to get work. Sometimes they don't have a car. Transport's not available. If I didn't have a car, I'd find it quite difficult to do what I'm doing. Actually, nigh on impossible. Public transport in this area, in the Hawkesbury area, is shocking. Teenagers who are looking for work rely on their parents if they've got a car, and sometimes the parents can't get a job, And if they do, they get told that they've got to, I think, if they're looking for work, they've got to travel 2 hours, and that's acceptable. It's hard to maintain that. So it's not always easy. Getting a job when you've got two children who are the age difference that my boys were, 8 years apart, you cannot have childminding for one and then leave the other one at home on their own, especially when the street is not safe. My income now is the pension. Up until February this year I was getting New Start, so now it's the pension. So that makes me a little bit better, but that means my rent goes up and different things like that. I do volunteer. I now volunteer with the TAG team, Wentworth TAG, Tenancy Advocacy Group. I also volunteer for the Women's Cottage, which is the Hawkesbury Women's and Kids Services, and have done so for the last 25 years. So, yes, I've kept myself busy, and they usually get me to do some sewing, volunteer, and, so I don't actually get paid to do that, I just do it. And if friends want, because I've been a sewer since I was 12 years old, I taught myself how to sew. So I just, people ask me to do a zipper or a hem or something, and because I know a few people, they sort of word of mouth, and I go, yeah, okay.
Breakfast, and as we were discussing just earlier,
for people who live in community and public housing, a bit like me, there is that you always walking around with a bit of a stigma. So you try and not make that, but some people can't do what I don't expect people to behave the same as I do, and they show their feelings differently, and so, but then also because drugs are prevalent in our society, it's not just a public housing or community housing situation. It comes from everywhere, and I've lived in different places and I've lived in different states, and people are people.